So a lot of what I do at AFT is work to build farmer networks and greater connections between farmers and service providers and create learning environments that are peer supported. So we spend a lot of time talking to farmers about their soil health challenges, and then there's a bigger picture of climate change that is really influencing adoption of soil health practices and sort of the need to adopt soil health practices, right? So the Northeast has seen more than a 70% increase in water dropped during heavy precipitation events, and this is projected to continue. Increases will be especially concentrated in winter and spring, right? And leaving more drought in the summertime due to both changes in the timing of that precipitation moving earlier in the year, and also higher temps in the summertime leading to more evaporation, and also quicker and earlier snow melt, right? So in this projection, we can see that we're predicted to have a much wetter winter, a wetter spring, a drier summer, and fall's a little variable depending on where you live. By the end of the century, the most recent National Climate Assessment projects that for most of the Northeast, 20 to more than 40% of the annual precipitation is going to fall in the heaviest 1% of precipitation events. Temps have gone up in Connecticut by almost 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, with most of that warming in the winter and spring, and temps are projected to keep rising depending on emission scenarios, whether they're high or low. And you've got lots more nights with temps above 70 degrees here in Connecticut, a trend that's consistent with the rest of the Northeast as well. So we've got overall warmer temperatures, especially in winter and spring. Warmer nights, heavier winter and spring precipitation, and drier summers. So what are some of the consequences for agriculture in Connecticut and the rest of the Northeast? You can just shout them out. Anyone?
More water in the summer and can't plant as well in the spring.
Can't plant as early in the spring, no water in the summer. Anything else that jumps out at folks about this? Soil erosion and those rain events, right? So in the spring and the winters, when you may have soil that's most vulnerable, right? If you haven't got a cover crop on or don't have good residue. So anything else that jumps out at you? Anyone else want to shout anything else out? It's not going to kill certain things. So the change in winter kill of cover crops, also pest and disease is a big one, right? So a lot of the things we just mentioned are here, but I think pathogens are a big thing we need to be thinking about, right? So warmer nights, more humidity, shorter, milder winters, that encourages pathogen spread, right? Another thing that's overlooked often is pesticide volatilization. Those higher temperatures are going to mean your pesticides are going to volatilize off of your leaves faster. If we're having warmer winters, we're having pests might start or projected to start squeezing in an extra life cycle, some of them. So more pesticide effectiveness goes down. So these are some things we have to think about, right? And you know, the thing about climate risks is that your unique climate risks are so specific to your site and to your farm, right? So all of these different things affect your specific climate risks. But the nice thing about soil health, right, is that it's something that you have a lot of control over compared to some other of your site specifics. And it's also something which impacts or affects so many of your climate risks compared to a lot of other interventions, which may help you with only one specific climate risk, right? So you could install drainage to deal with those early heavy precipitation, and you can install irrigation, and that's going to help you with drought. But soil health is going to help you in both scenarios, right? Both with the excess moisture and the increased drought. And I think something that's really often not thought about enough is human stress. So human stress is part of the climate change impact, right? So all of us, our emotional well-being as we deal with these impacts is part of the picture. And the thing is that implementation of soil health practices, both in what I hear on anecdotally, just talking to farmers, which I do every day, and also in studies that have been done, such as this South Dakota State University study. Farmers who are implementing soil health practices are feeling significantly more optimistic about their farm's future, about their farm's outcome, and sort of about their experience of farming. Farmers who practice soil health practices have less stress, greater farming satisfaction, greater optimism, and more fun. It's heavily backed up by my personal experience. We had a climate adaptation roundtable recently in Hadley, and there were farmers from across the soil health spectrum. We had like small scale, no-till farms to like big conventional farms, and the farms that had been doing no-till for a long time, in that there's a lot of despair expressed in that roundtable. It was really intense. But the farms that had been doing no-till for a while were like, it actually has been getting better for me every year. Well, the farmers who had been doing conventional tillage for longer were saying like, it's getting worse every year. So that was a very loud and clear message. So I think we need to think about emotional well-being, farmer stress when we talk about climate impacts. So just to take a big step back about soil health 101, right? So when we think about, so soil health is defined as the continued capacity of the soil to function as a living ecosystem, right? Ecosystems, basically they're living systems that just move energy around. And carbon compounds are the energy currency of the ecosystems, right? And so carbon enters the soil in a couple of ways, right? Through solid organic matter forms like compost, manure, leaf matter, but also through photosynthesis. This is a really important part of the process. That's the conversion of carbon dioxide and water using solar energy into sugars and oxygen, right? So plants pushing carbon into the soil in the form of these sugars in the form of root exudates is a big part of how carbon gets into the soil and how soil health is built. Those carbon compounds are traded to soil microbes in exchange for plant available nutrients. It's the microbes in the soil have pre-digested for them and traded to them to the plants for sugar. And so the more carbon exudates that your plants are able to push into the soil, the more robust your soil microbial community, the more carbon's getting traded around, the better the plant's diet is going to be, the more access it's going to have to these nutrients. And as you build up your microbial community underground, those microbes start to do things like bioengineer the soil environment to make it more to their liking. So building soil structure, building capacity to hold water. So it's a whole ecosystem underground that we're trying to build up through the conversion of carbon dioxide to soil organic matter to living things, right? So that's why that's what's really behind the 4 principles of soil health. This is something from NRCS. How many people have seen this before? Okay, so for quite a few people, this is their first time seeing it, right? So this is really, really important to think about. This is such an important concept, the 4 principles of soil health. So the first one is minimize disturbance, and you can really start anywhere in the wheel, but I like to start at minimize disturbance, right? So what we're talking, this whole event's about reducing the equipment that helps us reduce disturbance, right? But it's important to remember that also disturbance is also chemicals. Chemicals are a disturbance to the soil ecosystem. And I like to think about compaction, right? So avoid tillage and wet. Part of that is in control traffic. Compaction is also disturbance. When you're compressing the soil and removing those the habitat for the soil organisms, that's a disturbance to that. It's like chemicals, just like tillage. So it's important that we remember what disturbance is. It's not just tillage. Maximize soil cover, no naked soil. John said that earlier. I loved hearing that. All right. So soil cover protects the soil from erosion, maintains moisture, and can help manage weeds and reduce nutrient losses, which we heard about earlier, right? Maximize days in living cover. That's all about having those living roots in the ground that are pushing those carbon compounds into the soil and building up that microbial community. And then maximize diversity, as above, so below. All sorts of different plants have different relationships with different microorganisms, right? So when we have a diversity of above ground life, it's going to support a more diverse below ground life. We can also think about diversity in terms of integrating pollinators and integrating animals, right? So how do you assess your farm soil health condition? How many people have had NRCS come out and do a in-field soil health assessment for them? Awesome. Okay, a few people. Great. Let's have more of that. How many people have sent in a soil sample to Cornell for or to UMaine for the comprehensive soil health assessment with the microbial? Yep, excellent. Great. Good. So those are great tools. I really recommend working with NRCS to get that done for you. You can also develop your own powers of soil health observation, right? So soil health can be evaluated by a lot of different indicators, such as the color of your field soil compared to the field surrounding. You can look for evidence that living things are present in the soil, such as earthworms, earthworm burrows, mycelium in the soil, visible critters and the detritus that they leave behind. And also, I think another way to evaluate soil is just is you're using your sense of touch, right? So a field that has a is heavily tilled or is low in organic matter, I often find that when I've been working in that field and I've farmed for 10 years, my skin feels really dried out and my hands crack at the end of the day. But soil that's really has a lot of life in it is going to be greasier. It's going to have like a more greasy feeling because there's actually just more fat and biological compounds in that soil. And you can feel that when you develop your powers of observation. One of my favorite indicators is actually soil structure. What kind of cheese does your soil remind you of? So like NRCS folks always say, your soil should be like cottage cheese. Sometimes I also think of like blue cheese crumbles. If your soil is like a big block of cheddar, right? That's massive soil. There's no pores in it, right? If your soil is like grated Parmesan, that's like unaggregated soil. That's also not good. Soil that's like cheddar cheese that's been sliced up, that could be called platy soil. If it's horizontally aligned like that, that's an indication of compaction. So you're looking for those blue cheese crumbles or that cottage cheese texture. So in order to get help with your soil organic matter, your soil health, your practices, so great to work with NRCS, and you should definitely talk to Vivian if you haven't been working with NRCS yet. Definitely do that. But I want to present you with another option, like a DIY approach that you can get started on right away. So I really think that farmers should start thinking about soil health as part of their rotations. And here's a few steps for how to do that. Has anyone seen the Comprehensive Assessment of Soil Health report? Has anyone gotten one done and received a report back? Okay, so there's like at the back of the report, there's management suggestions by constraint. So as you learn to look for these constraints in your field, they have all these great management suggestions, but you don't have to get a soil health notebook for now. You can just download one of their sample reports and it'll come with this, with these management suggestions. And then you can sit down with your crop plan and you could use this as like a brainstorming board and think like, okay, so like for this crop, what practices could I reasonably do with this crop, right? And so for example, field tomatoes, I mean, this is fall, so it had already frosted, so don't judge the tomatoes, but this farm, what they did is they, in order to minimize tillage and soil disturbance, they stopped doing like, I think before they had plowed and then used like a rototiller to clean to like manage the weeds in the aisle. So they went to black plastic mulch and planted crimson clover in the aisles, right? So when you're planning this, the thing I should have mentioned also is try to meet all 4 principles of soil health with each practice that you're choosing. These are synergistic practices. So what you really want to do is try to meet each of the 4 with your practices. And then as you get more advanced and you develop your powers of observation, or you have somebody come out to your farm from NRCS who says, here are the resource concerns, you can start to pair your practices and have them be in response to the specific soil constraints that you're finding, right? So if your field has low organic matter, it's so pale soil and compaction, like platy, massive soil, then you instead of doing plowing or rototilling, you do a vertical tillage, like ripping, to minimize your disturbance, but also address that compaction. You can mulch your beds with compost and mulch straw to start rebuilding that soil organism habitat and getting some organic matter in there. You can grow a cover crop mix with daikon radish in the aisle. So you're getting more biodiversity and the radish is addressing that compaction. And you can do interfeeding of overwintering cover crop. How are we doing on time? I have a couple of minutes. Great. Whereas if you have a cold seasonally waterlogged soil, then maybe you want to make raised beds the previous summer and plant a winter kill cover crop so you don't have to get into that field in the spring. And then maybe a way to get more roots in the ground is to intercrop your tomatoes when you plant them with rows of lettuces that you're going to harvest out. And then also do a cover crop mix in the aisle, but maybe not until summer, so that it can not rot in the field, right? So here you're addressing all of these principles. And then start to build up rotations. So if you do something that involves a lot of mulch or a roller crimped cover crop, then follow it with more mulched crops and no-till cover crops and other no-till crops, because then what you're doing is you're adding to that residue layer, you're building up that residue layer. Whereas if you have to till, because for example, when you build up a lot of residue, you start to have rodent issues. This is a common thing we hear about. Then save the tillage event, the occasional vertical tillage or inversion tillage, for when you're going to have a rodent sensitive crop like a sweet potato or a beet, right? So think about your soil health practices in terms of multi-year rotations. I think I'm running short on time, so I'm just going to talk about one example of this. But Lincoln Fishman in Sawyer Farm in Worthington, Mass. He has a really interesting 3-year rotation he built where he has an early spring crop, harvests it out, plants Dutch white clover, gets that established, and then in year 2, he plants into that cover crop, right? That living cover crop. So it's died back a little bit over the winter, comes back in spring, and then he uses a no-till transplanter, a lot like the one we just saw earlier today, to rip a furrow and plant into that, right into that cover crop. And then the following year, he'll plow it in and start over in his rotation. And this doesn't work for every crop on his farm because he has cold soils. So it works for some crops, not others. With nightshades, he uses a totally different rotation system with more like a transferred mulch and raised bed system. And then, split farms are an example of using a totally different rotation, a more bio-intensive market garden rotation within the context of a larger farm that uses different practices for field crops. I'm not going to talk too much about that right now because of time, but we do have an event coming up where we're going to get into that system a little bit. So this might be an issue, but you might be able to, okay, you won't be able to use the QR code, but talk to me afterwards and I can help you find the link for that webinar. And we also have an upcoming soil health management planning course that runs for a whole year, but with not too big of a time lift every month, just for Connecticut farmers who are on the smaller scale end of the spectrum, where you can actually write your own soil health management plan to NRCS specifications, and then get your plan submitted for cost share consideration. So the applications for that are due May 15th, but you can apply for that. And I do have postcards in the back for that. So as you start to integrate these practices, just my recommendations to you would be to try stuff out on a smaller part of your farm. Don't jump into it with the whole farm. Just learn these practices on a smaller scale for one field at a time. Find a community of practice where you can bounce ideas off other farmers, and where you can visit other farmers to see what they're doing and have fun with it, because just maintaining an open and curious mind about outcomes will help you not get discouraged as you try things out.